Hey everyone, I'm Marbazir, and if you are a Darkest Dungeon 1 enjoyer, I'm here to tell you why you should drop whatever it is that you're doing and try Black Reliquary when it comes out on Steam. And it should be out by the time you see this video. It's coming out on March the 24th, and it is a completely free mod. And to say it's a mod is like saying nothing. It's a total overhaul of Darkest Dungeon 1. It changes or retunes vast majority of the game's mechanics, and frankly, it's high enough quality that it might as well be official Red Hook content. It is not, but nobody would even blink if it was released as official Red Hook content. It's actually that good. The gameplay, the systems, the art, the music, everything about it is actually amazing. Just one quick note, it is free. It also has its own Steam page, as in actual Steam page, not the Steam Workshop. But you don't need to own the Crimson Court DLC and the Shieldbreaker DLC. It's also not actually finished yet. When it initially comes out, it will be early access. So it's still in development, but it already has a lot of content. Anyway, let me tell you some of the reasons why I like it so much and why you should give it a shot. I'm only going to talk about some of the major new mechanics. I will not cover every single little thing that's changed, because it's a lot. In fact, when you first load it up, it gives you a warning that you should try to just forget whatever it is that you think you know about Darkest Dungeon 1, because the vast majority of the mechanics have been changed or retuned. And one of my favorite new mechanics in Black Reliquary is the preparation phase. Turn 1 is now called the preparation phase, and it halves your accuracy and makes it impossible to crit, for both you and your enemies. There are, however, certain skills that can ignore this penalty, and certain skills also have a different effect during preparation phase. So what this means is that you cannot get some really extreme outcomes on turn 1, like for example, a really fast enemy critting you for 40, and you're down to death's door before you can even react. Now this can still happen on turn 2, but now you have a chance to prepare, because crits are impossible. You can still hit the enemy, and it can hit you, even with the accuracy penalty. However, you can actually prepare for turn 2 by buffing yourself, for example. It also makes the skill design way more interesting, because some skills that were previously not that good are much more valuable now, because they are useful during preparation phase. It just introduces a lot more tactical depth to the game, while simultaneously eliminating some of the RNG shenanigans. And don't get me wrong, Darkest Dungeon 1 is still a very RNG dependent game. It has a lot more RNG than Darkest Dungeon 2. That is still the case here, but preparation phase is one of the best new mechanics in my opinion. It just makes the game better overall. It makes your tactical decisions more interesting. It makes the skill choice more interesting. And after playing the game for 45 hours so far, I kind of wish this mechanic existed in the base game and in Darkest Dungeon 2. I just like it that much. It makes the game objectively better and more interesting, in my opinion. Another big new mechanic are hero affiliations. Every single hero in the game can now be religious, pagan, or faithless. Some specific classes can only spawn as certain affiliations. Some can be any. And any hero can only have one single affiliation at a time. And each one of the 3 affiliations has its own advantages and disadvantages in combat. There are certain skills on various classes in the game that introduce new mechanics and new interactions with heroes of a specific affiliation. So, for example, you might have a skill that's basically just a guard skill. However, if you use that guard skill on a pagan hero, it will give him a damage and crit buff. If you use it on a religious hero, it will give him higher healing received and higher stress healing received. If you use it on a faithless hero, it will be just a normal guard. And there are a lot of skill interactions like this in the game, which makes your group composition decisions that much more interesting, and it also means you can build the kind of group composition that was not possible previously. And the example I just gave was just one single example. There are many interactions in the game that affect heroes with various affiliations. There are camping skills, for example, that can give you extra bonuses or extra penalties, depending on the hero affiliation. It's a major new mechanic. And it makes, again, hero choice, in my opinion, much more interesting. And it does have some really, really fun combos that I still keep discovering 45 hours in. Another big new change are 3 new combat statuses that have been introduced in Black Reliquary, which is Amber Blight, Expiation, and Enrage. And I don't want to spoil too much about them, but they have some really interesting interactions, and they enable some really fun and interesting new combat tactics. And they can be found on many different heroes and on many different skills. But just generally speaking, Amber Blight applies an ongoing debuff, which affects damage done or damage received or both, depending on the actions taken by the affected unit. And Expiate can make the affected unit damage itself, as well as heal the entire enemy group. So it can be used as sort of an alternative supporting heal of sorts. There are some limitations, and you can't just spam it and rely on it, but that's generally what it does. And Enrage buffs the target to give them a heal every time they perform a killing blow on an enemy. The Hellion, for example, has a self-enrage buff, and it can kill the Hellion whenever she gets a killing blow. Amber Blight and Expiate specifically have a lot of different interactions with various skills and the trinkets, and all kinds of other things, and your enemies will also use them fairly frequently. It's a pretty interesting new mechanic that adds extra tactical depth to the game. A lot of skills can also get extra utility against targets that are Amber Blighted or Expiated, or they can do more damage. For example, there's a skill that can apply a 2-turn stun if you use it against an Amber Blighted enemy, but only against Amber Blighted enemy. And that's just one quick example. Now, that's just the combat changes. One of the parts of Black Reliquary I really enjoyed are the actual dungeons, or rather regions, which you explore and quest in. So these are caverns, catacombs, exposed interior, and the treasury. And I'm not going to spoil anything specific about them, but I will say that all 4 of them are drastically different from each other. And we're not just talking about different enemies and different art, they are drastically different. The dungeon layout itself is often generated differently. There are also entirely new mechanics introduced in some of these dungeons that do not exist in other dungeons. And I'm not going to spoil it again because it's really fun to discover these things yourself. And it's fun running into them for the first time. Especially the treasury is quite a special zone. But again, each one of these 4 zones is very different. It's not just different mobs with different abilities and different resists. And it's not just different art. It's entirely different mechanics, different layouts. They play very differently, and you often need to employ a different strategy, depending on which one of these you are going to do. The region design is easily one of the best parts of Black Reliquary, but it's one of the many good parts of Black Reliquary. Speaking of design, another thing is enemy design. And I'm not just talking about the skills they use, I'm talking about the visual design. It's really good. I even think some of the enemies in Black Reliquary out Darkest Dungeon the Darkest Dungeon, so to speak. They're just that good, and they really fit the general vibe of Darkest Dungeon. I enjoyed them a lot. One of the other major changes, specifically in dungeons and combat, is how light level works. So now, if your light level is low, you will not get buffed, and you will have a chance to spawn more challenging enemies, who can drop better loot, be more valuable, but they will be tougher to beat. There are also some enemy types that appear more often at high light level, but they do not give more loot. So now the decision whether to run high light level, specifically above 50, or low light level below 50, is not nearly as obvious as it was in the past, because the enemies that can spawn below 50 light level can be a lot more challenging, and this mod overall is already harder than base Darkest Dungeon 1. So that's another thing I haven't really mentioned earlier. The overall difficulty of Black Reliquary is definitely higher, and when you first start playing it, you might get your ass kicked for a while until you figure out what works and what doesn't work. Just expect that. You can obviously overcome it. It does get easier once you figure out what works and what doesn't work, but you will likely need some adjustment period. There's also a new resource called Amber Dust, which you can turn into refined Amber Dust, which has a variety of different applications. You can use it to heal all of your stress from 100 to 0. You can use it to buy special contraband trinkets. Most of them have downsides and various penalties. Some of the downsides can be really severe, but they can enable some very powerful combos and strategies on specific classes. There are also some provisions that you can only buy with Amber Dust. And frankly, there are many other small changes that I could probably talk about for another hour or longer, but I covered all of the major ones, I think. Either way, like I said at the start, if you are a Darkest Dungeon 1 enjoyer, you should definitely do yourself a favor and try this mod. It should be out on Steam by the time you see this video. It will be out in early access on the 24th of March, and like I mentioned at the start, it has its own Steam page, and you can find the link to the Steam page in the video description. Black Reliquary is not only a great mod, it's one of the highest quality mods I ever played for any game, really. If this was released as official paid DLC, honestly, I don't think anyone would even blink. I have been streaming it quite a lot on Twitch in the past week or so. If you are interested in that, you should follow me over on Twitch at twitch.tv/Marblezir. And that link will also be in the video description below. And thanks for watching and listening to this video. I hope you found it helpful and that I piqued your interest. Leave a like if I did, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.